Chapter 81, The Enemy Lives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you love this translation, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. It motivates me to translate more chapters and new novels. Translator. Many Fasagod Editor. Ocelot, Father. Murong Ji kneeled at the cliff's edge crying. His wailing echoed forlornly in the abyss, seeing him filled people with grief. However, Murong Shui wasn't moved. Murong Jian had brought this upon himself and had died falling. He had no one else to blame but himself. I'm alright, a frail voice echoed from beneath the cliff. Murong Ji stopped crying and jolted to his senses. He peered down the edge and cried out in shock. Father. Is that really you? Yes, it's me. I'm alright. Let down a long rope. And pull me up. Murong Jian continued. His voice sounded weak, as if he was badly hurt. Alright, wait for me, I will be back. Murong Ji yelled back in joy. He then wiped his tears away and dashed towards the patrol guards. Sir, do you have a rope? Could you lend it to me for a little while? The purpose of having patrol guards was to detect and solve sudden complications in the area. Other than weapons, they also bring along ropes and other life-saving tools with them. The fact that Murong Ji looked very young, his eyes were filled with desperation and he had a tear-stained face, had the sympathy of patrol guards. They took out ropes and tied all of them together to form a single long rope. The rope was then let down the cliff. The rope swayed. Slowly, the patrol guards pulled the rope up and a badly injured man emerged with his robe torn in many areas. His hair was in a mess, his face was criss-crossed with scratches and his eyes held animosity. It was none other than Murong Jian. Murong Shui frowned. He had fallen down the cliff and yet, he had survived. This detestable being was hard to kill. Father. Murong Ji hurried over to untie the ropes knotted to his waist and hugged him. He cried out in happiness, You're all right. Murong Jian smiled and tousled his son's hair. Your father is very tough. He won't die so easily, especially when he's being attacked by someone deceitful. You are right. Good people don't live long but bad guys do. So of course, uncle, you wouldn't die so easily. Murong Shui smiled. The patrol guards heard the whole exchange. What she said doesn't seem right. Murong Jian's expression darkened and he gazed coldly at Murong Shui, his eyes displayed gleams of hatred. Murong Shui didn't show any signs of giving in and stared at him with contempt too. Their gazes met each other in mid-air, and without saying anything, they were battling with each other by glaring. Sir Murong, how did you fall off the cliff? A patrol guard came up to politely ask Murong Jian. After solving complications, the patrol guards naturally need to report the cause of it and how it happened. That was why one of them had approached Murong Jian. Murong Jian raised his brow and looked at Murong Shui, as if saying, If I tell them the truth, you will certainly be in deep trouble. Murong Shui smiled. Go ahead and do it. Uncle tried to assassinate nephew and niece but failed. Moreover, he was pushed down the cliff by his niece. The patrol guards would be very intrigued with your story. In fact, I think more people would love to hear about it too. Someone's work performance wasn't good enough to get noticed and returns to Jing City to assassinate people. What a detestable, evil person he is. Even if I can't trace who this person is, the officials in the upper ranking sure can. Murong Jian's face darkened to a murderous degree. You have no proof of me wanting to kill you and Murong Yi. Of course I do. That horse which just fell over was drugged by you, which was the best evidence. Murong Shui's gaze turned icy. Even though it has fallen down the cliff and no doubt, died in a splattered mess, but there are many patrol guards here. If they search carefully for it, they will indeed find its body. Murong Jian's face darkened even more, his hand under his sleeve clenched into a fist and he gritted his teeth. Murong Shui. Sir Murong. Sir Murong. Are you all right? The patrol guard saw that Murong Jian was staring elsewhere, unblinking, for quite some time and was worried. Murong Jian jolted to his senses and feigned a smile. I'm all right. I just accidentally fell off the cliff myself. Having heard his father's answer, Murong Ji jolted and interrupted, Father, but I saw it with my own eyes that. Murong Jian raised his hand and cut him off. That was what happened. Son, you were quite some distance away when it happened, you did not clearly see what was really going on. Murong Ji swallowed what he wanted to say and glared at Murong Shui, then Murong Yi. His eyes were filled with impenetrable hatred. The patrol guard nodded. Ah, I see. Sir Murong, you must have been frightened to death. Murong Jian smiled, you have saved me, I will always remember that. My assistant has been seriously injured and is still unconscious. Could you please send him back to Jin Country Palace to rest? The patrol guard looked at Murong Jian with surprise, Sir Murong, you're not going back. I need to accompany Ji to the army camp and won't be returning. Thank you all. Murong Jian smiled and pushed a silver ingot into the hand of the patrol guard, a token of gratitude, to buy yourself some wine. The patrol guard squeezed the silver ingot and smiled broadly, thank you, Sir Murong. Murong Shui raised her brow lightly. There were vine leaves on his robe, he must have held on to vines while he was falling and steadied himself, which explained why he was still alive. His sleeves however, were very much torn in many places and when he had passed the silver ingot to the patrol guard, his hands were trembling slightly. It was obvious that his arm had been injured. Why would he still not return to the palace to treat his wounds and insist on going to the army camp? Was he really that keen on letting his son join the army, or did he have another evil plan in store along the way? Ouyang, excuse us. The guard's bellows bore into the ears of all. Murong Shui looked over and saw the guards bowing to Ouyang Xiaochen then continuing with their patrol. She blinked a few times. Murong Jian's right-hand man, Kai Jin, had broken his leg which meant Murong Jian had lost another helper in his devious plan. If he were to execute another one, it wouldn't be as successful as this one. Let's see if he has any more tricks under his sleeve. L.RG, brother, it's getting very late. Let's continue our journey to the army camp. All right. Murong Yi nodded. His horse had gone mad and strayed off track, which wasted a lot of time. Hopefully he could still get to the army camp on time. Young master, allow me to give you a ride. Gu Hui led his horse over to Murong Yi. Murong Ye's horse had fallen into the abyss and Murong Jian and his son were still here, so who could guarantee that the other horses hadn't been drugged, too? Gu Hui was worried about Murong Yi riding alone, so that was why he made that offer. All right. Murong Yi nodded and mounted up Gu Hui's horse after him. Murong Shui too, mounted her horse. A white robe floated into view and sat behind her. A faint smell of bamboo ink encircled her nose. Murong Shui raised her brow at him, what do you think you're doing? Please consider adding us to your ad blockers whitelist. We take intrusive ads very seriously, please contact us if you come across a malicious ad. Chapter 82, Challenging Murong Yi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I'll send you to the army camp. Ouyang Xiaochen said briefly as his strong arms went across the sides of her body and held her in place. He took the reins from her. Murong Shui's back was stuck closely to Ouyang Xiaochen's chest. She can still see his face no matter if she raises her head or lowers her head, hence she avoided his gaze uneasily and kept a distance from him quietly. I know how to ride a horse, and I don't need you to send me. You sure about it after you fell down from the cliff? Ouyang Xiaochen glanced at her scornfully. Murong Shui's face was darkened, she said angrily, that's just an accident. Do you understand? If I were to let you ride alone to the army camp, another accident will occur. Ouyang Xiaochen was making fun of Murong Shui. He pulled the rein, and the horse sprinted in the forward direction. The light blue dress that Murong Shui was wearing fluttered elegantly and Ouyang Xiaochen was wearing a snow-white colored long robe. It was truly a picturesque scene. Gu Hui looked at the rising sun expressively and said, "Sit still, Xiao Houyi." He whipped the horse and it spread its legs and moved forward at maximum speed. Murong Jian stood rooted to the ground. He was staring at the horse that was getting further and further away. He squinted with his piercing eyes. Ouyang Xiaochen knows Murong Shui. He seems to be very close to her. Looking at his unfathomable expression, Murong Ji asked carefully, "Dad, are we still going to the army camp?" "Yes. Definitely we are going." Murong Jian said loudly. Kai Jin is in coma now and he also had a serious injury. They must achieve their initial goal after paying such a great price, there is no way for them to quit halfway. Ouyang Xiaochen had great horse riding skills, so Murong Shui did not really feel any jolts or bumps. She could smell the familiar scent of Mo Xiang when the wind was blowing. The scenery changed rapidly in front of her, and she narrowed her eyes and enjoyed the sight. "I'll place some bodyguards with you," Ouyang Xiaochen said suddenly, his eyes dark. "It's not necessary." Murong Shui shook her head and continued, "I can handle Murong Jian and his son." Ouyang Xiaochen took a look at her, "If you really can handle it yourself, you wouldn't have fell down from the cliff. It's a coincidence that I passed by and saved you, and you'll not be so lucky next time. You'd be smashed to pieces if you fell down from the cliff." Murong Shui's face darkened and she glared at him fiercely, "I've told you that it was an accident, can you stop mentioning on this matter? Your enemies are not only the family of Murong Jian, there are still the house of Du Shangshu and the house of Wuan. You sure you can handle them all by yourself?" Ouyang Xiaochen said in a low voice, his eyes were filled with anxiety. Murong Shui raised her eyebrow. She was left alone now. If all her enemies were to cooperate to combat her, she will not have a high chance of winning. However, if she accepted his bodyguard she would owe him a big favor. She did not know what to do to pay him back in return. "Let me consider for a moment." "All right." Ouyang Xiaochen nodded, relieved. "But you better not to take too long. When your enemies attack you, they will not even give you time to think." "I understand." Murong Shui nodded. There were fencings and army tents in front of her, so she was delighted. "We have reached the army camp." Ouyang Xiaochen answered her briefly and stopped the horse. Murong Shui jumped down without any hesitation. He was a bit disappointed as she was instantaneously far away from him and the refreshing smell of fire lotus seed had disappeared. He came down from the horse and handed the reins to Sun Feng. He strolled forward and held Murong Shui's hand, they walked together side by side. General Zhang was a 30-year-old man. He had a cold expression, a mustache on his face, and a pair of piercing eyes. He was training the soldiers and was taken aback when he saw Ouyang Xiaochen. He left the soldiers and walked toward Ouyang Xiaochen, "Prince." "General Zhang." Ouyang Xiaochen replied gently. "General Zhang, I'm not late, right?" Murong Yi ran toward them hastily, with sweat on his forehead. General Zhang looked up to the sky, "No, you're not considered late. Have you brought everything with you?" "Yes. I can be a soldier immediately." Murong Yi took his baggage from Gu Hui and raised it up highly with a broad smile on his face. General Zhang nodded, "You can immediately." "General Zhang, it's been a long time since we last met. How are you?" A happy voice came from a distance. Murong Shui raised her head toward the direction of the voice and she saw Murong Jian was walking toward them with his face wreathed in smiles. He had changed his attire, he combed his hair nicely and applied cream to the wound on his face. If he wasn't walking with a limp, no one could actually tell that he was injured. General Zhang was very observant. "Master Murong, what happened to you?" "I was careless and fell down." Murong Jian said naturally. He glanced at Murong Yi and said, "Yi Er is a mischievous kid, General Zhang must keep an eye and take good care of him in future. Don't mention it, Master Murong. General Zhang was being polite to Murong Jian, but he had the intention to keep his distance from Murong Jian. Murong Jian scowled a little in his heart, but he was still wearing a smile on his face. Yi Er is still very young, I don't really feel comfortable to letting him enter the army camp alone. I propose to let Ji Er accompany him. Can General Zhang recruit him as well? To be honest, every soldier team has their own codes. This year is not the recruitment year, so I cannot bring in anyone as I wish. I can keep Murongyi because an old soldier has passed away and Murongyi can substitute his position. General Zhang explained in detail. Oh, so that's the situation. Murong Jian nodded and smiled embarrassedly. Sorry for taking up your time, General Zhang. Ji Er, let's go back. He stretched out his hand to hold Murong Ji, but Murong Ji pushed him away. He straightened his body and walked toward General Zhang and said in a serious manner, General Zhang, the soldiers in the army camp have been trained for several years, I believe that they can battle right now. For the new soldiers, it would be better if they have great shooting skill and martial arts skill. General Zhang looked down at him from a height and asked, what do you mean? Murong Ji lifted his chin high and said arrogantly, since my cousin Yi and I want to become soldiers and there is only one place left, we should have an archery competition. The person who wins get to stay, Murong Shui smirked. She knew it, Murong Jian and his son came to the army camp with purpose. The father Murong Jian had snatched Ho Wei from Murong Yi, now the son Murong Ji was about to steal his place in the army camp. This father and son were truly bad. She wondered how General Zhang will settle this case. General Zhang's face had grown murky. He looked coldly at Murong Ji, your suggestion is good, but I've agreed to keep Murong Yi. I'm a man of my words. Murong Ji blushed in embarrassment as he was rejected in public, it was truly disgraceful. If the news spread out, he will be the joke of the town, and he did not want to be made fun of by others. Murong Ji suddenly had an idea and looked straight at Murong Yi, I challenge you. The person who wins will enter the army camp, the person who loses will leave. What do you think? If you love this translation, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. It motivates me to translate more chapters and new novels. Chapter 83, Competition. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ji Er, behave yourself. Murong Jian reprimanded him. Murong Ji was aggrieved, I'm just thinking that the better person gets to enter the army camp, and this will increase the combat power of the team, am I wrong? Murong Shui sniggered. Murong Ji was only a 14-year-old kid. He definitely would not know how to talk in such a manner. Murong Jian was the one who taught him all these lines. The father and son could not persuade General Zhang, so now they were trying to trap Murong Yi. They were undeniably smart and cunning. Murong Yi, I'm challenging you now, can you not act like a mute? Just answer me, do you dare to compete with me? Murong Ji looked straight Murong Yi proudly. Murong Yi stared at Murong Ji, his eyes were filled with determination, alright, I'll compete with you. Gu Hui said hurriedly, Xiao Ho Yi. Murong Yi raised his hand and interrupted Gu Hui, I agreed to compete with you neither to seek to prevail over others, nor show off myself, but to let you know I, Murong Yi, is a real man and I'm not afraid of any kind of challenges. You say, how do you want to compete? Murong Ji thought to himself. There was no need to say so nicely, as I will certainly let you lose the competition and feel shameful about yourself. Murong Ji sniffed and said, archery. All right. Murong Yi nodded, his eyes filled with perseverance and seriousness. General Zhang stole a look at Ouyang Xiaochen. He was calm and had no objection to the competition, so General Zhang granted their wishes and let the competition go on. The soldiers moved to a side and the training hall was instantly emptied. Around 10 targets for archery were placed in front of the hall. Murong Ji took his bow and arrow with him and walked in a leisurely pace. He glanced at the targets and frowned a little. The targets are all stationary, it is meaningless. In the battlefield, your enemies will not just stand there and let you shoot them. What do you want then? Murong-yi, holding his bow, asked softly. Murong-ji lifted his head up and said haughtily, let the targets move. We will both stand at the side and aim for the bullseye. Within the time of a burning joss stick, whoever shoots the most number of bullseyes will be the winner. All right. Murong-yi nodded. The challenge was proposed by Murong-ji, so no matter what request he had, Murong-yi will always agree with him. Shoo. 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 Around 10 targets were starting to move in the training hall. Murong-ji was standing at the left side of the hall. He held his long bow and arrow in place. With a loud sound of shoo, the arrow was launched and hit the bullseye accurately and hardly. Well done. A voice came from the crowd and the soldiers burst into an uproar. He has great skill. That was not bad. Murong Shue raised her brow. Shooting the moving target was much harder than shooting the stationary target. The targets in the hall were moving utterly without a style. If any slight mistake was made, he surely wouldn't get the bullseye. Murong-ji shot the bullseye at the very first attempt. Undoubtedly he had great skill as Murong-jian had put a lot of effort into him. How about Murong-ye's shooting skill? Murong Shue looked in the direction of Murong-yi, who was standing at the right side of the hall. He was aiming at the target with a dignified gaze. The arrows went shoo. Shoo. Shoo to the targets, all were shot on the bullseye. The huge hall was quieted down. Great. A voice came from the crowd again and a loud disturbance broke out. Xiao Houyi from the house of Zhenguo Ho is known to be a prodigal son. Never thought that he would have such a great shooting skill. He is the son of Yu Houyi. Yu Houyi was well known of his shooting skill back then, probably the best in the world. Now his son was only shooting some moving targets, nothing to be surprised about. That's right. There will be no laggard among the children of a talented man. Murong-ji knitted his brow as he heard the discussion of the soldiers. The reason he suggested having an archery competition was to perform himself, to display the wonderful shooting skill he has. Now that Murong-yi has become the center of the attention, he can never lose to him. Murong-ji held his bow and arrow in place and launched 3 arrows at a time. In a blink of an eye, 2 of the arrows hit the bullseye and the other one was at the edge of the bullseye. Shooting 3 at a time. That was a great skill, not bad. The soldiers complimented in admiration. Murong-jian's face grew gloomy. This skill was supposed to be used at the end of the competition, to make a remarkable ending and to impress the audience, to let them remember his extraordinary potential. The time of a burning joss stick had just started and he had showed them everything he's got, so what to do now? Murong-jian saw Murong-yi took out 3 arrows. From the corner of his eye, he aimed and shot. Shoo! 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 The 3 arrows hit the bullseye accurately, without a miss. The applause came from the soldiers. Great. That's impressive. He is indeed the son of Yu Houyi. Murong-jian narrowed his piercing eyes, his face darkened. The skill of Murong-yi was splendidly good. Was it the gene of Murong-yu, or the guidance from Gu Hui? Ji-er had 1 arrow shot at the edge of the bullseye. He was the biggest joke compared to Murong-yi. Evil. Murong-jian glared at Murong-ji furiously. He was looking pale, and his hand that held the bow was trembling. He gave a black look at Murong-yi, his gaze filled with hatred and anger. My shooting skill was taught by my father. In Jingzhou, no one is above him. In the capital of Qinyan, he is one of the best, too. How could Murong-yi win? How could it be? Murong-ji narrowed his eyes and rearmed his bow. The black arrows were shot toward Murong-yi. Shoo! 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 Murong-yi totally did not see that coming. He wanted to escape from it but he was too late. Dang, dang, dang. 3 needles hit the arrows and they dropped to the floor. The hall was in dead silence. The crowd looked in the direction where the needles had come from. In a blink of an eye, Morong Shui was standing at the center of the training hall. She looked at the black arrows on the ground and said coldly, "Morong Ji, are you shooting the target, or trying to kill? Don't be so mean, it's just a slip of my hand." Morong Ji lifted his chin high and said without any regard. He was cursing Morong Shui in his heart. Such a busybody. If it was not her, the arrow would definitely have killed Morong Yi. Is that so? Morong Shui lifted the corner of her mouth. All of a sudden she grabbed the bow and arrow from Morong Yi and all the crowd could hear was the sound, shoo. 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 The arrows hit on top of his head and both his shoulders, he was attached to the fencing. "Aw!" Morong Ji screeched in a frantic loud voice. "Ji air." Morong Jian was frightened as he went to Morong Ji swiftly. His shoulder was bleeding. Morong Jian was indignant at the sight. His gaze was like a sharp arrow that was shooting right toward Morong Shui. Chapter 84, Morong Jian losing it all. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I'm sorry for being careless, it's just a slip of my hand. Morong Shui smiled lightly, she was looking innocent. Morong Jian glared at her with gloomy complexion, she was obviously showing off and challenging him. "Ji air did not injure Morong Yi, why do you have to be so brutal? If it was not my needles that hit the 3 arrows, my brother would have died and not standing right here with me." Morong Shui looked at Morong Jian with cold expression. "Anyhow, it is just because you are not capable enough. Why didn't you hit my arrows and save your son? You." Morong Jian pointed his finger at Morong Shui, but he was too enraged to speak. "What's wrong with me? I'm not going to the battlefield, so it's fine for me to be careless when shooting," but for Morong Ji, he was determined to join the army team. If he had a slip of his hand, he would have shot his own allies and that's a great fault. Morong Shui was absolutely being sarcastic. The soldiers had goosebumps when they flashed back the scene which Morong Ji shot the 3 arrows mercilessly. They looked at Morong Ji thoughtfully. They do not need people who will shoot their own allies, the reason for them to join the army force is to defend their motherland in combat with the enemies. It would be rather baffling to be killed by your own teammate. Morong Jian glared at Morong Shui vehemently, he was on fire. After being insulted by Morong Shui in such a way, the best skill of Ji air is the biggest joke now. The shooting skill of Ji air will also be despised by the others. He will be boycotted and bullied by the others even though he managed to get into the army force. Morong Shui was truly evil-hearted. General Zhang walked toward them and said, "Master Morong, your son was injured badly, let the military surgeon treat him first." Morong Ji was injured in the army camp. Morong Jian recovered from his anger, he almost forgot that Morong Ji was wounded. "Thank you, General Zhang." "Don't mention, Master Morong." General Zhang was being polite to Morong Jian, he wanted to keep a distance with Morong Jian. A man in his mid-40s was wearing grey martial attire and holding a first aid box. He walked toward Morong Ji and checked his wound, the arrow on top of the head went across his hair, not a big problem, and the other 2 arrows on the shoulder did not hurt his bone. Morong Ji is still very young, he will recover soon after a good rest. The military surgeon said confidently and held the arrows in place. He pulled it out in a swift move and the blood was splashing out. "Ah!" Morong Ji shouted and fainted instantly, he was looking pale and weak. Morong Jian was stunned to see Morong Ji in such a condition, he held Morong Ji who was bleeding profusely in his arm. "Ji air. Ji air. Master Morong, you don't have to be worried or anxious, your son was only temporarily fainted, after the treatment and medicine given, he will regain consciousness." The military surgeon tore open Morong Ji's shirt and cleaned up his wound carefully. He applied medicine and bandaged Morong Ji. Morong Ji was looking better after the treatment, Morong Jian was finally relieved. thank you for your great effort, Doctor. You're welcome, Master Murong. The military doctor was being friendly to Murong Jian. Ah sure, bring Murong Xiao Ho Yi to the army camp and put his things. General Zhang instructed. Murong Xue raised her brow, because that meant Murong Yi was approved by General Zhang to become a soldier now. Murong Ji was injured, he would not be able to do archery with short period of time, not to mention to have training in the hall. Now he did not have any way to snatch the quota away from Murong Yi, no matter how infuriated he was, he could only look at Murong Yi enter the army force. She looked at Murong Jian from sideway, he was incensed. Thank you, General Zhang. Murong Yi expressed his gratitude as he smiled happily. He looked at Murong Xue seriously, sister, I wouldn't be able to go home in near future, you must take good care of yourself. He understood now, only his sister was sincere and kind to him in the house of Zhenghua, his great-grandmother, auntie, uncle and cousin, they all wanted him to die. They did not want him there to block their ways. Now, he was in the army force, they could not scheme against him anymore, so most probably they would release their anger on his sister and makes her suffer. Murong Xue smiled gently, no worries, I will take good care of myself. You must do well in the training and work hard, our family will be proud to have you. All right. Murong Yi nodded, he promised and pledged, I will never let you down. Murong Yi followed Ashur to the army camp, Gu Hui went after them to help. Murong Xue was feeling bored, Prince, it's late. Let's go back to the capital. All right. Ouyang Xiaochen nodded and walked in a relaxed manner. He was here to accompany her, now that she wanted to go back, he certainly will agree. Murong Jian suddenly remembered that female was prohibited from entering the army camp as he looked at the back of Ouyang Xiaochen and Murong Xue walking together. Murong Xue was not stopped from entering the army camp, was it because of Ouyang Xiaochen? The well-known Prince Xiaoyao Wang, he was definitely somebody. Murong Jian narrowed his eyes, his gaze was dark and gloomy. After walking out from the army camp, Murong Xue strolled toward her horse and untied it. Uncle Hui was busy right now, Prince you can take his horse, and I'll send him another one when I reach home later. Ouyang Xiaochen listened to her appropriate arrangement, he did not say a word but frowned a little. He snapped his finger gently, an internal force was released and hit the horse. Murong Xue brought her horse out from the fence and was about to ride it. The horse went out of control abruptly and sprinted away from Murong Xue. It did not turn back and left Murong Xue standing behind. Everything happened in just a blink of an eye, there was not enough time for her to react and the horse had already gone out of her sight. Murong Xue rubbed his hand that was in pain, she was angry and confused. What was going on? Why was the horse behaved like that? It was normal before this. Looking at her depressed face, Ouyang Xiaochen could not help to snigger, he was in extremely good mood. He walked toward Murong Xue, Wu Hen was taking the carriage here, and will just take the carriage. Murong Xue looked in the direction of his gaze, an exquisite carriage was parked not far away from them. There was a logo, the house of Xiaoyao Wang, hung on the carriage, his bodyguard Wu Hen was standing right beside the carriage with great respect. She could smell the familiar scent of Mo Zhu again, it was Ouyang Xiaochen walked past her and heading toward the carriage. Murong Xue sighed, her horse had ran away without any reason, and she was not sure whether Uncle Huey's horse was safe. She had no choice but to take the carriage with Ouyang Xiaochen, at least that's the safest choice. Chapter 85, Drunk. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Murong Xue walked towards the carriage moodily, just as she was putting down the curtains in her carriage. She saw a stroller being pushed from the army camp, on top of the stroller was stack of haze with unconscious Murong Ji and depressed Murong Jian on it. Murong Ji fainted after he was injured, he had to be carried back by carriage. However, there were no carriage that could accommodate people and not a single person were seen around the camp, therefore, they had no choice but to rode on this stroller back to the city. The striking sun was shining furiously on them, Murong Jian's injury was serious, he could get heat stroke on his way back. Murong Shue felt a gush of satisfaction inside when she saw them. An aromatic scent traveled to her nose, she was awakened by it. She turned around and saw Yang sat by the small table, drinking by himself. The bright sun shone through the window upon him, it smudged out a layer of light on his shadow, hazy, it was an unspeakable beauty. He poured out another glass of wine using his fair hands, the smell of the wine was fragrant, leaving people wanting more. Murong Shue felt dryness in her throat. Yang, is there any tea? She had not drank a single drop of water since dawn, she was thirsty. Yang mumbled, I was in a hurry this morning, there's no clear water in this carriage, do you want some wine instead? No, thanks. Murong Shue shook her head as her eyes glanced towards the bottle of wine. She was thirsty, wine could not fulfill her, it would be useless for her to drink it. The luxurious carriage fled on the rocky road, Murong Shue was bored throughout the journey, she was trying to find something to do when she felt a sift bag beside her. She looked down and saw a familiar white bag, it was Yang's water sack. Murong Shue took it out and pinched it slightly, there was still half left, it was enough to boil tea, but she could quench her thirst by drinking this. Murong Shue opened up the sack happily, as the sweet taste touched her lips, she gulped down more and more. I thought you did not want the wine. Why are you drinking it like a maniac? Yang retorted. Murong Shue stopped drinking immediately, this is wine. Yeah. Yang nodded. Murong Shue was horrified, why did you put wine in your water sack? She thought it was pure water, she had gulped down almost everything. Who says that I can't put wine in the water sack? Yang stared at her and continued, moreover, wine and water taste dissimilar, a smart person could differentiate it. Murong Shue was speechless, envy that she did not smell and taste any scent of wine, was Yang implying that she was stupid? Suddenly her head was spinning and her vision went blurry, she could no longer control her body movement, she tried to walk upright, instead her body was swaying from side to side. Watch out! Yang exclaimed as he rushed to hold down her waist, he grabbed the water sack and pinched it, it was almost empty. She drank more than what she could handle, no wonder she was drunk this fast. Murong Shue's blushing cheeks stared back at him, he massaged gently on her temples, are you all right? I'm fine, his musky scent increased her dizziness, she could not comprehend her thought, but my head is spinning. She was drunk, of course she felt giddy. Yang flicked her soft cheeks tenderly, he wanted to get the truth from her, Shue, who do you hate the most in this world? There was a saying of drinking the truth, he wanted to know the answers from her when she was drunk. Murong Shue glared in hatred, I hate a lot of people, Yi Chen, Qin Yuan, Madame Du, Murong Jian, Murong Ro. Yang smiled with joy as he listened to her naming the list of people she hated. What about the person you like the most? Who is it? Yang's heart was beating inside as he was eager to hear the answer. Murong Shue thought deeply, and shook her head, I don't think there's anyone that I like. There was nobody that she liked. So she did not like him. Yang could not believe his ears, he carried Murong Shue closer to him and stared deeply into her eyes, do you know who am I? Of course I know you, you are Master Yang from Xiaoyao. Murong Shue traced along his chest with her fingertips, then she wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer and said, Yang, do you know? Your eyebrows, your eyes, your face, you are the most fine-looking man I've ever seen in my life. Sincere compliments made his heart leap with joy, but he was confused, since I'm so good-looking to you, why don't you like me? I like you, you have helped me so much, how would I not? Murong Shue raised her eyebrows, not understanding what he meant. Yang sighed, he looked at her and said, I meant the like between man and woman, not between friends, do you understand? Murong Shue's stomach stirred up as she heard this, she was oblivious, confused, skeptical, puzzled. He knew it, she did not understand him. He did not expect this dumb lady to understand him anyways. Oh Yang hugged her waist tighter than before, her waist was so slim and soft. Oh Yang could not resist himself any longer, he slowly bent down and pressed his lips against hers. As his soft and wet lips touched hers, Morong Shue's eyes went wide in shock. She stared at the beautiful man in front of her, his eyes were so hypnotic and heart-capturing. Oh Yang's pupils dilated with this, and he held Morong Shue even tighter. At that moment, Morong Shue felt overwhelmed by the kiss, her mind went blank and her heart raced faster. Chapter 86, What's Done is Done. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you like this novel, consider donating. It really motivates us. Slightly Smiling Face. Editor by Ocelot. Oh Yang's scent made Morong Shue felt suffocated, she shuddered at this and pushed him away anxiously. Oh Yang held her wrist calmly, but she could not move with his firm grips around her wrist, so she kicked him instead. Oh Yang avoided her attack, he turned her around on a cotton rug, he gazed at her hazy eyes and panting face, he hugged her into his chest and started exploring her mouth. The kiss was gentle and passionate, she was fascinated by it and finally she let herself loose. Morong Shue was held down tight and could not move a single muscle, the passionate kiss was like a storm, flooding her lungs and eating up her soul. She was woozy and almost suffocated, her cheeks were flushed and red. As Oh Yang kissed intensely, he slowly made his way down to her neck, he sucked on her soft skin and red patches of love bites gradually tinted on her neckline. Abruptly, drops of tears fell on his cheeks. Oh Yang stopped his act and saw Morong Shue's eyes were filled with tears, he was taken back by this. What's wrong? Morong Shue pushed him aside and started punching him with her strength. I lost my parents since small, Yi Chen bullied me, Madame Du and her daughter bullied me, now, even you bullied me. Sob sob sob. Oh Yang did not fight back, his chest felt a pang in grief, he held Morong Shue's waist and explained, I'm sorry. It was unintentional. He just wanted to show her how he felt towards her, but she would never understand in this situation. I want to go home. I want to go home. Morong Shue cried out as she continued hitting him on his chest. Her loose blouse unfastened inadvertently, showing off her fair belly and skin. Oh Yang averted his eyes and pulled back her blouse. All right, I will take you home, please don't cry. Oh Yang cooed her and wiped off her tears with a handkerchief. She was still a crying baby like how she was, she did not change at all. The carriage halted progressively, Wu Heng reported in polite, Sir, we have arrived. Oh Yang helped Morong Shue down from the carriage and walked her to the main door of his house. Morong Shue followed his lead as they went along, she stopped as she saw the big signage on the door, this is not my home, we came to the wrong place. Oh Yang looked at the signage and continued on, it's also 4 letters, not much difference from your house. Wu Heng grinned at the side, Zhen Manor and Shao Spirit's Manor were indeed 4 letters, but they had a completely different meaning, and they represented 2 different households. This is really not my house. Morong Shue stated firmly, she held on the door knob tightly, not wanting to let go. Her household's surname was Ho, but this was Wang. We'll arrive there soon. Oh Yang lied as he tried to flick off her fingers from the door knob. She thought to herself, her parents were dead, the only brother had already gone into the army camp, there was nothing left for her to stay at Zhen Manor. Furthermore, with her current state, it was better to stay here and rest. Morong Shue's head was still whirling, her body was weak and frail, Oh Yang finally freed her grasp on the knob and led her inside the house. She murmured faintly as she trotted, this isn't my home, I don't want to go in. A man in tan clothing walked towards them, he accused Oh Yang when he heard her, Oh Yang, what are you trying to do? Taking advantage of a poor lady. Morong Shue's eyes were getting heavier as she walked, she surrendered to her weak body and leaned against Oh Yang's chest. Oh Yang stopped and carried Morong Shue in his arms as soon as he heard her steady breathing, he stared at the man and said, do I still need to take advantage of girls? The man in tan clothing coughed to cover up his embarrassment, indeed, Oh Yang was tall and handsome, tons of women were lining up to be with him, there was no need for him to initiate the move. However, the girl in his chest did not look like she was interested in him. "Who is this lady?" the man asked anxiously as he glanced over at Murong Shui, but her face was buried completely in his chest. "She's from Murong's," Yang replied, continuing walking speedily with Murong Shui in his arms. "Murong's? Which Murong's?" The man was puzzled. "How many Murong family do we have in this city?" Yang snapped. The man was astounded. "She is Murong Shui from Jin Manor." Yang acknowledged him by nodding slightly and walked away. The man recalled his memory of her arrogant face in the Colosseum. He proceeded with great interest. "Are you serious about her?" Yang looked at the man and exclaimed, "Do I look like some phony swindler?" The man dry laughed a little. "She is the fiancée of Yi Chen. Now she got into this intense fight with him, you might get labeled as pervert if you got too close to her." Pang, the main door was slammed loudly in front of him. The man did not expect such response. His nose was bleeding due to the slamming on his face, 2 streams of blood ran down his nostrils. He quickly took out a handkerchief from his pants and stared angrily at the door. He was merely advising him. Why would Yang got so mad at him? "Yang, I have something important to tell you, come out now." The man banged on the door with his fist. He was too concentrated in making fun with Yang and had totally forgotten about the important matter. "Tell me tomorrow, I want to rest now." Yang said coldly. The man joked, "Murong Shui is the one who got drunk, not you, what rest do you need?" An idea flashed through his mind all of a sudden. He suddenly realized, "Yang, are you thinking of taking advantage of her?" Chapter 87, Weeping. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you love our translation, please consider us donating. Or we are also on Patreon. It really motivates us to give more time for translation. This week chapters 1/5 editor. Ocelot, leave, a white ceramic cup flew across the room onto the man. The man was ready for this. He seized the cup but was pushed a few steps behind due to the strength. His feet were numb from the force. He scoffed at the thought of him busting his plan, and now Yang was raging. "Yang, since you have your lover in there, I won't disturb you then, see you tomorrow." The man teased further and walked away. He had to spend time alone since his friend engrossed more on his love life rather than friend. As soon as he heard the light footsteps walking further, Yang's face loosened and he looked down at Murong Shui. She was sleeping soundly on the bed. Her face was blushing slightly, her long eyelashes were closed tightly, creating a soft shadow on her cheeks. She looked so peaceful and still. Yang moved his fingers slowly to her blouse. He tugged on the ribbon gently and it fell off instantly. Her faint blushed belly and skin was driving him crazy. He felt the satisfaction as he looked at the love bites on her neckline. Yang pulled up a layer of blanket to cover her body and lied beside her, pulling her closer as he did. The soft touch of her body felt tremendously comfortable. Yang held her tightly and hid his head in her neck, sleeping at the scent of her aroma. He wanted to make Murong Shui his forever, but she was too young for that, and she did not like him yet. He could not bear to hurt her. The huge bedroom came to a silence. It was heartfelt as the sunlight shone upon them through the checkered windows. Compared to the disordered situation at the courtyard of Jin Manor, Xiaoyao Manor was much more serene. Song Qinyan sat by Madame Du's bed, crying out, "Grandma, you have to take your side on me this time." Madame Du could not even got down from her bed. She was frustrated enough. "What happened?" "Mother went into the prison because she cheated the money from our nephew. Now my uncle, auntie and cousins hate me very much. Even the maids and stewards were teasing me when they saw me. I am the eldest daughter in the house, but I no longer have power in the family." Song Qinyan howled pleadingly. Madame Du squinted her eyebrows when she heard this. "Are you blaming your mother for putting you through this by breaking the law of Qinyan?" "No, no." Song Qinyan shook her head in fear. "I just want to invite you over to Wuan Manor to explain for me, so that they will not bully me." Madame Du comforted her and said, I am the lady of Jean Manor, how can I go over and threaten them in Wuhan Manor? You go find your father and your grandmother, ask them to stand on your side, then nobody will ever criticize you again. Sob sob. Father is always busy, he hasn't come back home for days. Grandmother would glare at me and scold me when she sees me. She will never protect me. I have no choice but to find you now. Song Qin Yen covered her face in her silk hanky, her body trembled as she wept. Madame Du's face sunk immediately. Ro Er cheated Morong Ye's money for everyone in Wuhan Manor. Now that she was busted and was captured in jail, they did not only refuse to help her, they even bullied you. They are too much. I know, mother took the stuff for everyone in Wuhan Manor, they received everything she gave to them, now when she was revealed, they treated her as if she was dirt. Song Qin Yen would never let them go easily for what they had done. Madame Du looked at her and said, you should stay here for the next few days, wait till your uncle is back, I will ask him to go over to Wuhan Manor with you. Thank you, Grandma. Song Qin Yen sighed in relief, she dared not to go back to Wuhan Manor alone, her grandmother's decision was perfect for her current situation. Madam, bad news, the masters were injured, a steward panted anxiously as she ran forward to report. Madame Du exclaimed, what happened? Why there were two people getting injured all of a sudden. According to second master, it was Murong Shui. The steward shouted loudly, she could not care less by now since everyone in this house were under Madame Du. Madame Du clenched her fist in fury, Murong Shui had always been the one who bring misfortune to her family, was it serious? The steward replied, the old master was wounded all over, his limbs were hurt as well. Second master was unconscious as his elbows were shot by arrow. Madame Du was astonished, that was serious. Bring the doctor, faster. The second lady has already done that, the steward replied politely. Madame Du shouted in rage, they are both injured, one doctor is not enough, get another one. Yes, the steward nodded quickly and ran out. You guys, carry me now, I want to see Jian Air and Ji Air. Madame Du commanded. Her beloved son and grandchild were severely injured, she had to go see them right away. Yes, the maids and stewards started to gather around her to assist her in her clothes and hair, it was a chaos. Song Qin Yen stood in the corner and looked at the furious old lady, she raised her eyebrows and walked out of the room. Murong Shui was the one who caused her to be humiliated by her own family members, she wanted to get revenge for herself and mother, therefore she came here today asking for her uncle to torture Murong Shui without mercy. She never thought that Uncle Jian and Cousin Ji were already wounded by Murong Shui and laying unconscious before she could see them. Apparently, Murong Shui was very powerful, it would not be easy to get rid of her. I can help you to get rid of Murong Shui, a feminine voice came from behind, Song Qin Yen jumped at the voice, who is it? Chapter 88, Crafty Plots. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you love our translation, please consider us donating. Or we are also on Patreon. It really motivates us to give more time for translation. This week chapters 2-5 editor. Ocelot, it's me. A purple silhouette with an arrogant voice appeared 3 meters away. She had a perfect bodyline and sharp figure, she was the princess of Mabe, Qin Yuyuan. Song Qin Yen widened her eyes in surprise. Qin Yuyuan was the noble princess of Mabe and the sweetheart of the knight of Qin Yen, Prince Yichen. Before this, she was totally not related to her. Princess Qin, why are you helping me? Because I cannot bear the sight of Murong Shui. Qin Yuyuan said coldly. Yichen gave her the best medicine. Her external and internal injuries recovered at the fastest speed, but she could never forget how Murong Shui had whacked and insulted her. She will only feel relief after tearing Murong Shui into pieces. Looking at her furious gaze, Song Qin Yen suddenly remembered the incident in which Murong Shui and Qin Yuyuan were having a debate during dinner. Qin Yuyuan was the sweetheart of Yi Chen, his fiancé was definitely an eyesore to her, and so she was helping Song Qin Yen teach Murong Shui a valuable lesson. Princess Qin, what are you planning to do? She hated Murong Shui very much. She would be overwhelmed with joy if Murong Shui was punished. I'm coming up with a brilliant idea to torture Murong Shui and vent your anger, Ms. Song. Qin Yuyuan said gently with a cold gaze. Please do so, Princess Qin. Song Qin Yen was smiling happily. She had no way to fight against Murong Shui and she was disliked by most of her family, and so she could not take revenge on Murong Shui by herself. Qin Yuyuan was the sweetheart of the night, Prince Yichen. They had so much manpower that if she wanted to punish Murong Shui, it would be a piece of cake. Song Qin Yen accepted her help so easily that it was obvious that she loathed Murong Shui very much. Murong Shui must have committed all sorts of wicked actions. Harshness flashed in Qin Yuyuan's eyes. Murong Shui is very smart, so we cannot rush. We have to come up with an explicit plan to scheme against her. I'll think of the most brutal way to torture her. I'll make her unable to either live or die, simply to appease your anger, Ms. Song. Thanks a lot, Princess Qin. Song Qin Yen looked at her with great gratitude. Don't mention it. Qin Yuyuan looked at Song Qin Yen briefly and said, I have encountered some difficulties lately, and I want you to do me a favor. Are you willing to do so? What's that? Just speak what's on your mind, Princess Qin. Song Qin Yen looked at her sincerely. She was willing to do anything that would harm Murong Shui and make her suffer. Murong Shui opened her eyes in a daze, the warm sunlight caressed her face. She narrowed her eyes as the scent of flowers surrounded her. She could not tell why, but she was really refreshed and feeling great. Ednel.co She lifted her arms out of the blanket and wanted to stretch her body. Her skin felt a chill and she shivered a little. She was frightened at that moment as she realized her arms were naked and she was only wearing her tube and pants. She could see the sky green colored curtain, the red sandalwood furniture and the exquisite antique vase. She was taken aback and immediately sat up straight. This is not her room. You're awake. Murong Shui was stunned to hear a man's voice. Looking in the direction the voice came from, she saw Ouyang Xiaochen coming out from the screen. He was wearing a snow-white shirt with a delicate floral pattern on its sleeves. The shirt resonated with his noble status while the steam from his back indicated that he just had his bath. Murong Shui examined her surrounding and noticed that she was in the house of Xiaoyao Wang. This was Ouyang Xiaochen's room. She has been here before, but... Why am I here? The silk blanket slipped down and Murong Shui's pale moist skin was exposed instantly. Her delicate collarbone was a breathtaking sight to be seen. Ouyang Xiaochen looked away from her in a gentlemanly manner and said, You were drunk when we were on our way back to the capital from the army camp, don't you remember? Murong Shui blinked her eyes as she recalled that she drank the half bottle of water. Her face darkened immediately. People would fill the water bottle with water, but Ouyang Xiaochen filling it with liquor. Tat was seriously weird. What's the time now? Chen Shi, 7 to 9 in the morning. Ouyang Xiaochen said gently. Murong Shui raised her brow. When she was drunk, it was Wu Shi, 11 to 1 in the afternoon, and it was Chen Shi now. She had been drunk for more than 20 hours. The after-effect of Ling Long Zui was indeed very great. Murong Shui turned around and prepared to dress. She saw her reflection clearly in the bronze mirror not far away from her. Her lips were vivid red in color and her pale neck had some red spots on it. She frowned a little as she stroked the red spots. Prince Ouyang, there are mosquitoes in your room. Mosquitoes. Ouyang Xiaochen scowled. His room was filled with extraordinary spices that repelled mosquitoes. It was impossible for mosquitoes to exist in his room. I think you're mistaken. How is that possible? Murong Shui shook her head and pointed at the red spots on her neck. Look at it yourself, I've been bitten in a few places. Ouyang Xiaochen did not say a word. One night had passed and the red spots on her neck had subsided a lot, only leaving a faint red color. It looked like mosquitoes' bites. The bad thing he did was not revealed, but he was not feeling good. He even felt a bit fretful and his face had grown murky. He looked straight at Morong Shue. The things that happened after you got drunk, you actually can't remember any of it. Many things happened after she got drunk. Morong Shue blinked and tried to recall with great effort, but when she recalled some of the memories, the picture would disappear instantaneously. Staring at her lost expression, Ouyang Xiaochen knew she could not remember anything and it depressed him. He frowned as he said, "Forget about it. I'll ask the servant to prepare breakfast. It's okay, I'm not hungry now. I'll go back to the house of Zhenguohou to have breakfast." Morong Shue said impatiently. She grabbed her dress and walked behind the screen. It's just that she could not remember the things happened when she was drunk, so why was he showing his temper? That's rather baffling. She did not want to stay there any longer. "I'm going now." She walked from behind the screen after she dressed. She stomped out of the room without turning around. Ouyang Xiaochen was down, but he followed behind her. "I'll send you." The after effect of Ling Long Zui was incredibly great. Although she was conscious, her body was retained much Ling Long Zui, he would be anxious to let her go back alone. Morong Shue was mute and did not pay much attention on Ouyang Xiaochen who was walking behind her. She followed the path of the green stone road and strolled from the house of Xiao Yao Wang straight back to the house of Zhenguohou. The door of house of Zhenguohou was wide opened, with 2 guards standing at each side. They saluted hurriedly when they saw Morong Shue and Ouyang Xiaochen, "Prince Ouyang, Ms. Morong." Morong Shue answered them briefly and stepped quickly into her house. After some distance, she slowed her pace. Ouyang Xiaochen did not consume anything and chose to send her back early in the morning. It would be extremely unreasonable if she did not invite him in. She turned toward the direction of the door and said with little feeling, "Prince Ouyang, come in and have a cup of tea. If you want to support this translation, consider donating and/or adding us to your ad blockers whitelist. We take intrusive ads very seriously. Please contact us if you come across a malicious ad." Chapter 89, Deadly Trap. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you love our translation, please consider us donating. Or we are also on Patreon. It really motivates us to give more time for translation. This week chapters 3-5 editor. Ocelot Ouyang Xiaochen was about to leave, but he halted as soon as he heard her words. He smiled softly, "Great." Ouyang Xiaochen sauntered into the house of Zhenguohou together with Morong Shue. The faint sunlight enveloped them both. It was such a picturesque scene. The servants who were tidying could not help but steal a look at them, they were so well suited to each other. Without anyone noticing, a servant girl sneaked into Yutang Hall and reported the incident to Du Shi. Du Shi narrowed her shrewd eyes after listening to her words. Ouyang Xiaochen responded to her invitation and entered our house. "Are you sure about it?" "Madam, I'm 100% sure about it." The servant girl nodded profusely. "There is only one man in the world who is this elegant and noble, and he is Ouyang Xiaochen. She can definitely recognize him." "What's going on then?" Du Shi knitted her brow tightly. "People said that Prince Xiao Yao Wang was a solitary individual. He was even discourteous to the ministers in the imperial court, so how could he respond to the invitation of Morong Shue? What could it be? The hero becomes a prisoner of love." Morong Jian, who was sitting beside her, spoke suddenly. "Can see clearly the tender, loving and care he has for her. I am certain that Ouyang Xiaochen is in love with Morong Shue." Du Shi shook her head in disagreement. "Ouyang Xiaochen has been to various countries in the world and seen numerous pretty ladies. How is it possible for him to fall for a 14-year-old young girl like Morong Shue? You can't make a conclusion like that. Morong Shue's features are very like with her mother's. She is undeniably a great beauty in the world. Even though Ouyang Xiaochen has been to so many places, it's unlikely that he has encountered ladies who are prettier than Morong Shui, said Morong Jian. Du Shi's face had grown gloomy instantly. She could not believe, but she also could not deny the fact that Morong Shui was honestly good-looking. She was born with nice facial features which would make young men go crazy for her. Sometimes even Du Shi would lose focus when she looked at Morong Shui. If she was not sick and had to stay in Luo Shuigu all the time, then she would be famous as the exceedingly beautiful lady and would be the talk of the town. Ouyang Xiaochen is here to back up Morong Shui. We can't battle with her anymore, or it will lead to our own destruction. This evil girl was so innately smart that she found herself such a great support. It's indefinite. Morong Jian smiled in an unfathomable manner. Men will always disdain the old one when they get someone new. Ouyang Xiaochen's attraction to Morong Shui is probably due to the feeling of freshness. If we could find someone to fascinate Ouyang Xiaochen, we could still tackle Morong Shui. Du Shi was enlightened, you mean? That's right. Morong Jian nodded, grinning as he looked toward Song Qin Yen, scrutinizing her thoroughly. Song Qin Yen felt uneasy and tightened her clothes imperceptibly. Uncle, why are you looking at me in such a way? Qin Yen has grown up now. Morong Jian smiled. He had an ulterior motive going on in his mind. Well, she is around the age to get married. Du Shi continued, her face suffused with smile. Song Qin Yen blushed instantly and spoke in a girlish voice, Great-grandmother, you're making fun of me again. Great-grandmother was only telling the truth. Du Shi glanced at her flushed face as she asked, Qin Yen, do you like Prince Ouyang? Song Qin Yen was stunned at the thought. The glamorous face of Ouyang Xiaochen appeared in her mind and she blushed again, but she said in a bitter and astringent manner, Ouyang Xiaochen is a wonderful man, he is the dream man for every girl, but he would not give me a thought. You've not tried before, how do you know he is not interested in you? Morong Jian interrupted her in a low voice. Song Qin Yen was lost for a moment. Uncle, what do you mean? The chemistry between male and female will only be created through daily interaction and communication. You have not even spoken to Ouyang Xiaochen, so how could he get to know you and fall in love with you? Morong Jian took a look at her. If you want someone to fall for you, you must talk to him more, create more topics to discuss, let him remember you. Song Qin Yen understood clearly now. How did she know Prince Ouyang is not interested in her when she had hardly spoken to him? Thanks for your advice, uncle. I have something going on, so I'll have to leave now. Song Qin Yen dashed out, her eyes filled with intense excitement and happiness. Prince Ouyang is right here in the house of Zhenguohou. She can approach him straight away right now and snatch him from Morong Shui, giving her a big blow. Looking at Song Qin Yan's back, Du Shi was anxious. Do you think Ouyang Xiaochen will fall for Qin Yan? It was not that she looked down on her grandchild, but in fact Qin Yan was indeed an ordinary girl. People hardly ever noticed her. Just rest assured, Qin Yan will not disappoint us. Morong Jian smiled. He was too profound to be understood. Ouyang Xiaochen had traveled for 10 years with so much exposure, but he was not interested in any girl until he met Morong Shui. It was obvious that he liked Morong Shui. Although Song Qin Yen was not as beautiful as Morong Shui, she was almost same age as Morong Shui. Moreover, she was Morong Shui's cousin, she must have some common resemblances to Morong Shui. As long as she tried hard enough she could definitely attract Ouyang Xiaochen, make him enter their camp, and become their strong support. By that time, Morong Shui would be alone and they could do anything they wanted to her. They could get the position of Zhenguohou easily as well. Morong Shui did not know their wicked plan as she ambled into Luo Shuigu. Wang. Wang, a white silhouette pounced. Morong Shui wanted to catch it, but it went across Morong Shui and threw itself towards Ouyang Xiaochen. It revolved around him, it was cheered up. You're very close with it. Morong Shui raised her brow as she looked at Ouyang Xiaochen. It was the third time he visited her room. The previous times Bei Bei was not there, so how could it be this happy when it sees him now? Ouyang Xiaochen looked at her confused face and smiled involuntarily. He squatted down and stroked its head. I think we can be considered quite close. When I got it back to my house, it was just a newborn baby that had fainted at the mountain road. I took care of it for 3 months until one day it ran out and did not come back again. Murong Shui blinked her eyes. She knew the incident that happened after that. Bei Bei was caught and sold to the Colosseum, and coincidentally she bought it. Since Bei Bei belongs to you can just bring it back with you. Murong Shui was loath to part with Bei Bei, but he knew Bei Bei earlier than she did and he was Bei Bei's rightful owner, so she should come between them. Looking at her sad gaze, Ouyang Xiaochen lifted the corner of his mouth. I have many bodyguards with me, so I don't need it. I think you should have it. A lot of things annoyed her at this moment. She did not need Bei Bei with her as well. Murong Shui was about to speak, but all of a sudden she heard a voice. She looked toward the direction and asked, "Who's that?" Chapter 90, Meeting Mu Lu Feng for the first time. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If you love our translation, please consider us donating. Or we are also on Patreon. It really motivates us to give more time for translation. This week chapters 4-5 editor. Ocelot, it's me. A young man drifted down in front of Murong Shui and replied in a high-spirited tone. He was wearing an elegant ebony-colored long robe, the sleeves of which were embellished with a floral pattern. His chest muscles were exposed a little as the sleeves slightly opened. He was smiling amorously, and his perfect facial features made people go wild. His dark hair was combed to the back, making him truly mysterious and sexy. He was scrutinizing Murong Shui, and it was obvious that he was gallanting her. "Who are you?" Murong Shui scowled. He seemed to be very close with her as he spoke, but she could not remember him in her memories. "I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the prince from Qinguodong, Mu Lu Feng. You can call me Lu Feng or Feng." Mu Lu Feng narrowed his eyes and smiled as he looked at her, his tone ambiguous. Murong Shui knitted her brows. "Prince Mu, I think we are not that close." Mu Lu Feng snapped closed his folding fan and looked at her in disagreement. "Our families are old family friends. Furthermore, my father and your father were best friends. Both of us can be considered childhood sweethearts, how can we be not close?" Bang! Ouyang Xiaochen waved his hand and smashed Mu Lu Feng into the wall. He stood in front of Murong Shui and stared at him coldly. "Mu Lu Feng, you're talking nonsense today." Mu Lu Feng turned around and rubbed of the blood from his nose with his handkerchief, as he said in a careless manner, "This is the first time I've met Murong Shui officially. I'm just a bit excited." Ouyang Xiaochen's face darkened. "Yeah, you even talked about being childhood sweethearts with her. Take it easy, even though we are childhood sweethearts, I will not steal her away from you." Mu Lu Feng said in a low voice as he patted Ouyang Xiaochen's shoulder to comfort him. Ouyang Xiaochen frowned a little. He gave Mu Lu Feng a cold shoulder by beating away his hand. "Why did you come here and not stay in the house of Qinguodong?" "That's obvious. I am here to see your little wife, and tell you an important issue as well," Mu Lu Feng said in a mysterious tone. He went to look for Ouyang Xiaochen in the house of Xiao Yao Wang, but since Ouyang Xiaochen came to the house of Zhenghua Hoha followed him here. Ouyang Xiaochen took a look at him. "So you've seen her. Now let's discuss on the important issue. It's about Prince Jing, Yi Yichen." Mu Lu Feng lowered his voice, stealing a look at Murong Shui. Murong Shui knew she should not be there during the discussion, so she said sensibly, "You guys have a chat, I'll ask the servants to get us some tea." Ouyang Xiaochen grabbed her hand as she was about to leave, and he looked at Mu Lu Feng briefly. "Shui'er is not an outsider, just go ahead and speak what is on your mind." Ouyang Xiaochen honestly trusted Murong Shui wholeheartedly as he chose to discuss her fiancé right in front of her. Since Ouyang Xiaochen did not bother doing so, Mu Lu Feng would not mind as well. The spies in the house of Chen Guogong have found out that Yi Chen has been very mysterious recently. He's looking for the treasure left by the royal ancestors. Mu Lu Feng said seriously in a low voice. Treasure left by the royal ancestors. A thought flashed across the mind of Murong Shui, it was so fast that she could not catch it in time. Prince Jing has such a noble status. He's filthy rich and living a luxurious life for generations. Why does he need to spend great effort to look for treasure? No one will be contented with the money he has. Mu Lu Feng said arrogantly, his eyes shining brightly. Yi Chen is an overweeningly ambitious man. He is expanding his power silently and he seems to be unsatisfied with only being Prince Jing of Qin Yan. Murong Shui blinked her eyes. According to history, the previous emperor was dissolute and debauched. He spent lavishly and made the country poor, which resulted in the sufferings of the citizens. He was such a prodigal emperor, how could there be any treasure? That's something you don't know. Someone who could squander that much would definitely be in love with searching for gold, silver, and jewelry. He will keep them in his vault quietly without being noticed. As a result, there must be a trove of priceless treasures. Mu Lu Feng continued his words, Yi Chen is a smart man, and he will not simply believe in rumors and do something meaningless. Since he sent his men to look for the treasure, it proves that the treasure truly exists. You guys really have courage to block my way, get aside now. I'm sorry, but there's order from Ms. Murong. Without her permission, no one can enter her front yard. All of you. I have something urgent that I need to see Prince Ouyang about right now. If anything goes wrong, are you going to bear the responsibility? The intense argument can be heard from inside. Murong Shui was speechless as she looked at the sky. The admirers of Ouyang Xiaochen came to her Luo Shuigu to look for him, that was really too much. She raised her brows as she stared at Ouyang Xiaochen, Prince Ouyang, aren't you supposed to go out and meet her? Ouyang Xiaochen said without any emotion, I'm not free to see her, you go and bundle her off. Murong Shui's face had grown murky, she came here purposely for you, why am I the one to bundle her off? Ouyang Xiaochen took a look at her and said naturally, this is your Luo Shuigu. I am the guest here and you're the host. I am being disturbed by other people at your place. Don't you think you have the responsibility to solve the problem for me? This evil-hearted guy dared to ask for favors in such a logical way. That was abominable. If he wasn't the guest of her house, she would certainly ignore him. If there is a next time, she will teach him a lesson for sure. She glared at Ouyang Xiaochen as she walked out from the room unwillingly. Staring at Murong Shui's back, Mu Lu Feng showed his respect to Ouyang Xiaochen, Prince Ouyang, I have to salute you. Both of you have not married yet and she's beginning to chase other girls away from you. You're truly capable. To be honest, the position you hold, the good looks you own, and you're such a brilliant man with extensive knowledge. These attributes will attract girls to you. If Murong Shui was to marry you, she would have to continue to chasing girls away from you. It's good for her to practice earlier on. Ouyang Xiaochen's face had grown gloomy, do you think I am a flirty man? You're not flirty, but those girls like to stick themselves to you. Mu Lu Feng narrowed his eyes and smiled, just like the one waiting for you outside Luo Shuigu, she suddenly came here just for you. Ouyang Xiaochen looked straight at Mu Lu Feng, his gaze like an arrow shooting right towards Mu Lu Feng. Mu Lu Feng was frightened. He could feel the chill flowing in his heart and he shivered a little. He coughed to camouflage his uneasiness, I think that it's better for us to continue on our discussion about Yi Chen and the treasure. Ouyang Xiaochen answered him briefly and glanced at Murong Shui. She was walking out from Luo Shuigu and raising her brow as she looked at the person waiting out there.